Joe Biden is a pathetic, sad, lamentable, small man who never should have made it to the Oval Office and did through a series of mistakes and, frankly, in my opinion, nefarious moves to ensure that Donald Trump would not get a second term. Joe Biden yesterday from the Oval Office, the center of power on this planet. It's the most powerful desk, the most powerful chair on the planet. And here's what it looks like when Joe Biden is delivering his final words to an eager nation. He's sitting on his little tushy pillow so his bony butt doesn't get sore. Why does he need a pillow? I mean, honestly, it's not like he sits at his desk all day. And it's not like the chair already has plenty of cushion in it. Now, listen, the little glass of water on the side, I don't begrudge him that. And clearly the tissues I could use myself once in a while. It happens, and it's good to have a spare. But the pillow? Really, Gramps? You got to have a pillow? Well, that's the least of the embarrassments. Let's get right to it with Joe Biden going out the way he came in, fighting with his teleprompter.
Now, his farewell address, President Eisenhower spoke of the dangers of the military-industrial complex. He warned us then about, and I quote, the potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power, end of quote.
I don't think he's supposed to say end of quote. He does the Ron Burgundy thing, right? Who put the question mark on the teleprompter? Don't you know he'll say exactly what's written on that thing? I don't think he's supposed to say the end of quote part. By the way, I love that he wants to throw out this warning here and liken himself to Ike and warning of the military industrial complex. Dude, you've been like the sugar daddy to the military industrial complex. Can we talk about Ukraine for a minute? How many more? Yeah, we've got it. I'm going to repeat the words of President Dwight Eisenhower and warn of the growing threat of the military-industrial complex. And, oh, by the way, I've just signed another $100 billion to the war effort in Ukraine. You're welcome, Raytheon. See you right after the show. Ha ha. That was not the only problem our illustrious commander-in-chief had with the teleprompter. How about this moment?
Contributions. We need to get it out of our politics. We need to enact an 18-year term limit, time and term, for the strongest ethics reforms for our Supreme Court. We need to ban members of Congress from trading stock while they're in the Congress.
I got to tell you something. I could you understand half of what he said? Thankfully, I had the transcript there. First of all, you can't understand him because, as my father used to say, when I wouldn't speak up properly, you sound like a salesman with a mouthful of samples. Yeah, that's how I was raised. It was funny. And that's exactly what he sounds like. And of course, he has mashed potato for brains, and he can't read his teleprompter. And his whole job was to read on video a scripted telepromptered speech. And he can't even do that. Oh, sure. But he would have beaten Trump and he'd be lined up for 4 more years, whatever. He's calling for an 18-year term limit, but he said time limit and then term limit for the Supreme Court, which, by the way, you proposed and Kamala Harris proposed during the election, and the American people soundly rejected your idea. So what the hell are you doing? He trotted out all of these policy things that we have to do. On his way out the door, the policy ideas that the American people just said, we don't want. And so on his way out the door, what is he doing? Trying to cling with his fingernails to the desk in the Oval Office and say, but I was right all along. You should do what I say. It's a waste of everybody's time. And then I like this, considering the news cycle right now includes the catfight between Jill Biden and Nancy Pelosi. And Jill and Joe feel betrayed by their friend of 50 years, Nancy Pelosi, for booting them and casting them aside in the middle of the summer. They still haven't spoken to each other. He calls to ban members of Congress from trading stocks. When have we ever heard Joe Biden say this? Ever? Suddenly now on his way out the door with his angry, bitter, vicious, vindictive attitude toward Nancy Pelosi, he said, by the way, stop letting members of Congress trade stocks, which, by the way, I'm okay with. But you know that Nancy gets hurt hardest by that. Well, actually, she doesn't get hit hard at all because she's already made her wealth, hasn't she? All right, enough of the gaffes and the flubs and the fights with the teleprompter. Let's get to some of the substance here as this angry, bitter, dark, malaise-filled man tried to warn America about how bad things are as he leaves the office. Think about this. He had all these warnings about where this country is headed, and he acts like he hasn't been in charge steering the ship for the last 4 years. Things are really bad right now. Yeah, we know. That's why we ask you to leave. All right, here's one of his warnings.
I want to warn the country of some things that give me great concern. This is a dangerous and that's a dangerous concentration of power in the hands of a very few ultra-wealthy people. And the dangerous consequences if their abuse of power is left unchecked. Today, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead. We see the consequences all across America, and we've seen it before, more than a century ago. But the American people stood up to the robber barons back then and busted the trusts. They didn't punish the wealthy, just made the wealthy play by the rules everybody else had to. Workers want rights to earn their fair share. You know, they were dealt into the deal, and it helped put us on a path to building the largest middle class, the most prosperous century any nation in the world has ever seen. We've got to do that again. In the last 4 years, that is exactly what we've done. People should be able to make as much as they can, but play by the same rules, pay their fair share of taxes.
He's cooked. He has no idea half the things he's saying right now. But let's just talk about the hypocritical irony here. This is the man who 10 days ago was putting a Medal of Freedom in the hands of the son of George Soros. And now he's warning about an oligarchy of rich robber barons who will use their money and their power to influence American politics. Are you kidding me? And this whole idea, you know, he's talking about big tech. He's talking about Elon Musk. He's talking about social media. He's talking about Jeff Bezos. He's talking about all these people. They were your oligarchs 4 years ago. You wouldn't be sitting in that office if Mark Zuckerberg hadn't used his money and Jeff Bezos hadn't used his money and power and influence through the Washington Post to help you along and to hurt Donald Trump. They were fine with all of these rich big tech, what he's calling robber barons, back when they were his rich big tech robber barons. The hypocrisy is palpable with this guy, and you can't believe a damn word he said. He's warning against the concentration of power, and then at the same time saying, but we've been able to achieve something great over the last 4 years. If you've been able to achieve something so great and make it such a fair nation over the last 4 years, then why the moment you leave do you have to warn about this growing oligarchy in this country? Well, it's a pretty fragile house of cards you built. If like that, it can all go away. But of course, it's not anywhere near the threat that he's talking about. Although he does reveal his hand when he starts to be very, very concerned about his and his party's and his government's inability to censor free speech in this country. Think about this. Joe Biden, on his way out the door, wants to warn everybody about the desperate need for fact checkers on Facebook.
Americans are being buried under an avalanche of misinformation and disinformation, enabling the abuse of power. The free press is crumbling. Editors are disappearing. Social media is giving up on fact checking. The truth is smothered by lies told for power and for profit. We must hold the social platforms accountable to protect our children, our families, and our very democracy from the abuse of power.
Yeah, thank you to our friends at Newsbusters. Let's just break this down for a second here so you can really recognize how hypocritical and what a liar this man is, and whatever apparatus is around him pulling his strings and working his mouth here and writing the speech to put these words in his mouth because he doesn't know what he's doing. This is a man right now warning of the lack of fact checkers and social media going and unchecked opinions and voices and misinformation, as he calls it. This is a man who used the power of his office and the power of the federal government to censor and silence and violate the constitutional and civil rights of any everyday average American, not to mention publications like the New York Post and other right of center publications. This is a man who, if you put on your own Facebook page expressing concerns about the COVID shot, because if you're a woman, your monthly cycle seems to be off and everything was fine until you got the shot and now your cycle is all messed up, or your young teenage son who was perfectly healthy, but the only way he was allowed back in school is if he got the COVID shot, and now doctor is saying that he's having some issues with his heart and some palpitations. If you put that on your Facebook page or shared that on social media, Biden would send his flying monkey henchmen there to Mark Zuckerberg's office to demand that your account be suspended for expressing your opinion, for relaying your own personal situation. And then finally, years later, his own FDA says, oh, yeah, women are having some problems with their cycle. Maybe there are some issues with ovulation with this thing. Oh, well, it's absolutely despicable. And let's just be clear. What he's really lamenting here is not misinformation. He's lamenting that the government does not have the influence and control over your thoughts, your speech, and your opinions. The man is an authoritarian. But it is a wondrous thing to behold as Joe Biden, on his way out the door, warns the nation about fact checkers. Yes, Dwight Eisenhower warned us all about the growing power and influence of the military-industrial complex. George Washington, on the way out the door, in his farewell address, authored by Alexander Hamilton, warned about foreign entanglements and ensuring that we don't make alliances with countries that drag us into wars against our own best interest. And Joe Biden, following in those great American president's footsteps, warns the American people that PolitiFact is not going to be able to regulate information on Facebook. The man's a giant, an absolute giant. As one can expect, over on CNN, they have a post-speech discussion, and Scott Jennings did what Scott Jennings does, and he did not disappoint.
I think the way he's leaving office has been, frankly, pretty terrible. He's going to be remembered for a few things. But politically, it's mostly for when he was vice president, he and Obama sort of ushering in the Trump era initially. And then as he's leaving office as president, bringing back Trump and Trumpism stronger and more popular than ever. Today, Biden has like a 61% disapproval, and Trump is over a 50% approval and more popular, and his ideology is more popular than it's ever been. If everything you say is true, the Democrats should have had no trouble getting reelected in this election, yet they were.
It's an issue of a communications failure.
I know, and for Democrats, it's always been about communication and no introspection about the policies that led to him leaving office as one of the most unpopular presidents. When I watch this tonight, I remain astonished that he, his family, and other people around him thought he could ever run for another term. I mean, there's no way he could serve another 6 months, let alone another 4 years. The fact that they pursued that farce for as long as they did, to me, remains one of the most astonishing things about this term. So,
yeah, one of the great things about Scott Jennings and his work at CNN is he says, frankly, the obvious. He says things that resonates with anyone with a brain who's watching, anyone, even with some objectivity. You don't have to be a conservative Republican to agree with that. That's just obvious. And what makes Scott Jennings so good is that nobody else on that panel would ever dare say that. No one on that panel would ever dare say the obvious objective truth. And that's why Scott Jennings is so powerful, because the truth really does sort of blow apart the propaganda that you're used to seeing on CNN. And his great moments continued here. This is a beautiful exchange.
Kamala Harris or Karine Jean-Pierre ever lied?
I don't know. What are you talking about?
I mean,
I know where you're going with this,
you're-
but that's not the point.
you're-
Donald Trump stands up at the
your-
podium every day and
your
delivers
speech is about the truth. And one thing about Biden that has always vexed Republicans is that he spends a lot of time talking about him being the center of truth and the restoration of the soul of the nation. And yet he and his people spend a heck of a lot of time undermining that very talking point, up to and including this year with the massive cover-up of his own
Scott,
condition.
how about
And so I'm
Trump
just,
lying to the American people doing COVID? Right?
about what?
How about that? I mean, drink bleach, right? I could go
Didn't
on
have
and
to
on.
debunk-
That it's not as bad as the flu. I mean, all of those
Debunk.
things. And the reality is, 500.
You're doing it right now.
500,000 people lost their lives because the president wasn't honest with the country
I don't
about
understand.
the
Are you
dangers
saying
of
that-
COVID.
are you saying the
point is-
virus was
no, my
listening
point
to
is
Donald
that
Trump?
lies have consequences, and that is.
I just want to make sure I understand that your
Sure.
position is that Donald Trump's words induced the virus to kill people.
No, what Donald Trump's words did was prevented people from protecting themselves
Come on.
and their neighbors, and 500,000
Come
plus people lost their lives.
See-
That was my point. And more importantly, because of his lies, he didn't create an infrastructure from the governors all the way
He gave
down
you
to
the
get
vaccine.
shots in
He
arms,
gave you the
to get
vaccine.
the economy open
So,
again.
Jay,
so lies have consequences, and
honestly,
that's what Biden was
we,
talking about today.
there-
So we have to be aware of
So
that.
Wow. And it is a great thing. And frankly, the beginning part of that was the most powerful part, where this woman is talking about Trump lies, Trump lies, Trump lies. And Scott Cheney is like, guys, the greatest lie in American politics of these last several years, if not of the last several decades, was the cover-up of Joe Biden's health. For Joe Biden to sit out there and warn the country about lies and misinformation while they have covered up his cognitive, mental, and physical decline on a daily basis until it just couldn't be covered up anymore. And they're going to lecture us about lies? And then the second he says, give me an example of a Trump lie during COVID. And the first thing out of her mouth, well, he said we should drink bleach. That's a lie. And that's all they can do is lie. They've lied about Joe Biden since he announced he was going to run for office. They've lied about his condition. They've lied about his abilities. The entire 2020 campaign was a lie, as he did the entire thing from his basement with the help of video cameras and teleprompters. All of it was a lie. The need for social distancing during the pandemic was a lie. And then that social distancing triggering the unprecedented election voter precautions that were put in place, because you can't stand in line to cast your ballot on election day because we have to have social distancing. So we better have drop boxes and millions and millions of mail-in ballots. And oh, look at that. It was the mail-in ballots that made the difference for Joe Biden. And don't you dare challenge it, because you'll be a denier. And all of it is a lie. And so now Joe Biden goes out with a lie. And all of the king's horses and all of the king's men who refuse to acknowledge that this man is wearing no clothes, well, they'll continue to lie for him. They'll continue to lie and continue to lie and continue to lie. And that's good, because they're never going to learn the lesson of 2024. They're never going to learn the lesson that they were wrong. And as Scott Jennings just pointed out in such a great way, and thank you, Scott, for being there on CNN for us, they always think that they're right about everything and they do no wrong. And if they lose an election, well, we just couldn't get the word out. It was a communications problem. They had $1.5 billion. They had every single late night talk show. They had every single major movie star. They had freaking Beyonce and Taylor Swift. They had the mainstream media lining up to do their legacy propaganda work for them. They had the judiciary try to convict Donald Trump and throw him in jail, and they had courts trying to remove Trump's name from the ballot. But we just had a communications problem. We just couldn't get the word out. Socialism hasn't really been tried perfectly yet. It'll work next time. We just have communications issues. I want to turn to one of my favorite things about the new X, the lack of oversight right now on our opinions in social media, is that we don't need gatekeepers sitting in an ivory tower in west side of Manhattan to tell us what opinions are worth hearing and worth believing. And so I want to share with you just some guy, Peter Cook. I don't know who Peter Cook is, but he shared his thoughts about the Biden presidency and about this speech, and I thought it resonated. And see, this is what Elon Musk means by we are the media now, because Peter Cook's voice deserves to be heard just as much as Jake Tapper, actually more than Jake Tapper's voice deserves to be heard, because I think Peter Cook, whoever he is, nailed it. Just listen to Biden's full farewell address. I don't think his speechwriters did him any favors. This speech will not be remembered as a great speech or a poor one. It simply won't be remembered at all. Biden's legacy is that he will not leave one. he will be a footnote in history. The man who was elected to defeat his predecessor, but did such a poor job that voters decided to return that predecessor to the Oval Office. Biden had a short window in which he could have been a good president, but squandered that opportunity when his ego convinced him he should attempt to be a great one. He could be leaving office, being hailed as the president who returned normalcy and humbly stepped away from power after one term. Instead, he was replaced as his party's candidate when they realized he was leading them toward a historic loss, was unable to get his vice president elected, and will leave office as one of the most unpopular presidents in recent American history. Biden's story almost sounds like a tragedy, but it's not. The tragedy is a story in which a noble man or hero was brought down by a fatal flaw. Joe Biden was never a noble man, or even a particularly good one. He's a contemptible man who managed to succeed despite his flaws because he spent his career as one of many and failed when he reached an office where his deficiencies were finally on full display. Biden's farewell address was a disjointed series of outward pleasantries hiding an angry, bitter core beneath, which actually makes it a fitting end to his long and undistinguished career. Mr. Cook, I couldn't have said it better myself. Well done. He's absolutely right. Joe Biden is a pathetic, sad, lamentable, small man who never should have made it to the Oval Office and did through a series of mistakes and, frankly, in my opinion, nefarious moves to ensure that Donald Trump would not get a second term. And then, given the opportunity again, the American people made sure that it wasn't even close. If Joe Biden has any lasting legacy, a positive one that the American people can appreciate, it's that he paved the way for Donald Trump's second term that he's had 4 years to prepare for. And he is much wiser and much more prepared than he was 4 years ago. We cannot wait for Inauguration Day, just 4 days from now. Goodbye, Joe Biden.